I want to talk about this 3-year journey in the sense of what we feel, or I feel, is one big reason why innovation lags behind in Pakistan. And this is a number I want you to remember. It's 119 over 128. There is a global innovation index that's run by INSEAD and Cornell and World, I think it's the Intellectual Property Organization. And this is Pakistan's ranking, 119 out of 128. If you were to ask any Pakistani, he'd probably say we are in the top 10. But yes, and thank you, that's actually really great, because Jugaad, there's another index that they derive from the same thing. So this index is based on inputs that you put in and outputs that you get. There is a ratio that they also calculate of inputs to outputs. And when they use that as a benchmark as a measure, Pakistan ranks 71st. And the reason for that, in my book, is Jugaad. We are great at improvisational creativity. We can take a piece of string and some masking tape and something and fix your car silencer and make it work at next to nothing. But we cannot actually make a product and take that to its logical end. So we need to kind of look at that. There are lots of reasons that one can, and we can have a long discussion, and if you give me the time, and if somebody really pokes me, I'm going to spend 2 hours here. But I'll condense it into one word, and that one word is apathy. So I could say this word, but I didn't know what it meant. So here's what it means. It's a lack of interest, lack of enthusiasm or concern, indifference. That side is not working, so I'll just read it out for you, or some of the words. Indifference, lack of interest, lack of enthusiasm, unconcern, uninterestedness. Basically, I would say, we really don't care. And I say this because I have met in the last 3 or 4 years, ever since I went on this journey, I've met quite a few people at the top levels of corporate Pakistan. And while you will find that their vision and mission statements have almost always the word innovation in there, when you actually ask them to do something about it, then it becomes not my problem. So innovation is for somebody else to do. I just want to bear the fruits or take advantage of the fruits of that innovation, but I'm not willing to do anything myself, including putting resources in. So part of the responsibility for a national innovation index is that the government needs to put resources in. So even at that end, we kind of are left behind. So what's the result of all this? The result is that we become irrelevant. Somebody did mention it during their speech, the word relevance and irrelevance. This has actually become a very big part of my vocabulary. And here is an example of global companies becoming irrelevant. So on the left, in 1996, you see the Fortune 500, the global Fortune 500 companies, the top 5. And on the right, you see the results of 2014. Not one of those 5 from 96 is there in 2014. In fact, the top 4 are Japanese, and there's no Japanese company in the top 5. And that's what happens. We become irrelevant. And a lot of things are making us face that. One of the things that's happening is a lot of inventions and technology advancements are cutting the middleman out. So if you are a middleman sitting in between two parties, well, I can probably say that in 10 years you won't exist, maybe even earlier, if you're a middleman. So you have to question yourself, and you can probably ask yourself, what is it that makes me irrelevant? That's kind of the reverse brainstorming. You find out what makes you irrelevant, and then you try to become that, because that's the only way you're going to survive. But then when faced with change, how do we react? A couple of ways. One of them is that apathy or complacence. You say, yeah, fine, there's something happening somewhere in the world, and it doesn't affect me. How many of us have heard of Netflix? Yeah, practically everybody in the room. How many of us have heard of Blockbuster? Okay, a few. Well, guess who knocked Blockbuster out of the park? Netflix. Blockbuster, at the top of its game, had 9,000 stores in more than one country. 9,000 stores. I think last year or year before last, they closed down their last store. Why did that happen? One gentleman, Blockbuster used to charge almost $800 million in late fees every year. So Blockbuster was a video rental service where you went into a store, you picked up a video, you rented it for 3 days, and then you returned it back to the store. If you were late, you were charged late fees. They would make $800 million in late fees. One gentleman was forced to pay $40 in late fees for a video he had rented. And he said, you know, how can I disrupt this? How can I change this? So he started Netflix, which actually was also a rental service, but it was rental by mail. You didn't have to go to a store. But the difference between Blockbuster and Netflix was that when video streaming started, Netflix went onto the streaming platform. And here's the irony. Dr. Sarah said something about companies refusing her. Alexander had a story about one toy company not giving him the time of day and one toy company saying, please come in and we'll put you in the coat hanger room at least and we'll have a chat. Netflix was offered to Blockbuster for $50 million in 2000. Complacence. Blockbuster said, thank you very much. Today, Netflix is worth $28 billion and Blockbuster closed its last store. There's other reactions that you have. Some people get angry and they attack, and the cases of attacks on Uber drivers is a case in point. In Africa, when Uber entered the market, taxi drivers would get together, they'd order an Uber. When the car came, they'd pull the driver out and thrash the living daylights out of him. I've seen it in Lisbon as well. There have been strikes and a little bit more civilized anger venting at the airport. They shut the airport down, the taxi drivers. Bitcoin is an example in the banking world which is disrupting banking, but there are central banks that are actually actively fighting. The stories coming out is that it's being used for illegal trades and this and that and the other, but then so are banks. So they're fighting it, and that anger is probably reflective of fear, but the only way they know how to react is by fighting it. A few companies, of course, are open to change. So IBM is a great example. IBM used to be Big Blue, the hardware company to beat all hardware companies. Mainframe computers, mini computers. But now it's a software and integration company. In the 1990s, they were going through a bad time and they just totally changed their model. So they were open to that change. They could see that change happening and adapt to it. So the question you have to ask is, how will you react? How do you react when you see change? And what are you willing to do about it? So you have to find something to do about it. And again, through my travels, struggling with explaining innovation to people, because innovation is a buzzword. And innovation, when you say innovation to someone, they always look at those big, huge, new, out-of-the-box, radical products. And they say, oh, I can't do that, because innovation is difficult. So I made this model. I believe that Ismat has already stolen this and revealed this. Oh, she did not steal it yet. So I made this model. Mizan Bank is the only one who got the first taste of it a week ago. So this model that I made was trying to explain innovation and create a zone of innovation where we all could act. On the vertical axis, you have incremental to radical innovation. And a quick example, iPod is an incremental innovation. The MP3 player already existed when the iPod came out. Steve Jobs just took an existing product and made something absolutely super brilliant out of it. But the point is that it was not entirely there were some radical things in there, like the touch wheel scrolling and all that. So that's why it's called a continuum. And this is a word that I used when I was making this model. When you have more than one continuum, they are called continua. So here's a little addition to your English language. So it lies somewhere. It's not exactly incremental, it's not exactly radical, but it's somewhere on that line. The iPad or iTunes as a music store, that was a radical innovation, because that totally changed how music was being consumed. Instead of buying CDs with full albums and 12 songs, you could buy one song for 99 cents. On the horizontal axis, you have process and product. So you can be innovating anywhere on that. You can be innovating processes, you can be innovating products. You can create physical products, you can also create new processes. And then when they intersect, you get 4 quadrants. So on the bottom right quadrant, you get product and incremental. Incremental product innovations. Things that are small changes to products, maybe adding a few features, adding new features, making them do the same thing in a better way. They lead to steady growth in an organization. And you get clear growth. On the left, where incremental innovation meets process innovation, you get productivity gains. So you would be reducing the number of steps in a process. You could be creating a better process to do something. You could be eliminating people in between. You could be using technology to improve your processes. And so you're getting a gain in productivity or a saving in cost. You move up to the top left, and that is a radical process innovation. And here where things start get interesting. For example, the assembly line is a radical innovation that suddenly gives you industry leadership, because here are people who are creating one whole product one by one and not being so efficient. Then comes the assembly line, and we suddenly have a game changer in the process side. And you become an industry leader. But here's something that the clarifiers amongst us will realize, that, well, that industry leadership is not very long lasting, because other people will start catching up with you. And then everybody will have an assembly line, and then the game begins again. Because in the end, corporate life is an infinite game. You're not doing this for 5 years. Think about the Mitsubishis and the Sumitomos that no longer exist in the top 5. Well, we are all there to perpetuate this game, and you have to constantly be innovating. And finally, on the right comes the game changers, the radical product innovations, which could be some of them processes. So the thing I'm struggling with here is, how do you define Uber or Airbnb? Is it a radical product, or is it a radical process? Or is it a bit of both? And then you understand the value of having a continuum, because you could place it anywhere and then just start justifying it. So I would place it more on the radical product side, but more towards the center, and say it's a process and product combined. But for our thinking, especially in Pakistan, I would like us to concentrate on that bottom green line, where we are looking at small changes every day. And we had that, I think, in our workshop also today. Things like, in the workshop that I ran today, we had a company that had an issue with people spitting pan in the factory. And we kind of worked out some solutions to encourage people not to do that. That's incremental. That's very small. It doesn't change your product life cycle. It doesn't increase your profitability. It doesn't do much for you in that sense, but it does a lot. It also helps you create a climate. A company that does this on a daily basis means that's doing this. It means that in the end, you're creating a climate where the big ideas will suddenly flow out from there, using something like collective intelligence as well. So General Shinesky said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. So my appeal to you is, before you become irrelevant, please start doing something about it. Make that change. I know it's not folded, but I couldn't find a picture with a folded paper towel. But I'd like you to make that change. Shake and fold. That's a small change. I don't know how many of you have tried it, but I feel good. Thank you. I feel good every time I do this. I just feel I've saved another tree or something. So go out, make that change, think about daily innovation, because the way you react to change is what will define your future. Thank you very much. Thank you.